I've spent more than $20 million on Google Ads and scaled literally hundreds of campaigns. Now, every Google advertiser dreams of being able to scale really successful campaigns, but to do that, you need to use the right scaling strategy, because if you use the wrong scaling strategy, there is a very good chance that you will ruin your results. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use one of my favorite Google Ads scaling strategies that is working really well for us right now. Okay, so to demonstrate this Google Ads scaling strategy, I'm in one of our example Google Ad accounts, and I've just come through to the campaign level. You can see over on the left-hand side. And then from here, I'm going to go ahead and click on these three little buttons above More, and then select Create an Automated Rule. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to create an automated rule to dynamically increase the budget, so scale, as long as certain criteria are met. In other words, as long as we're getting good results, we're going to be spending more on our Google Ad campaigns. And as I go through, I'll explain more of the details, but this is a fantastic way of scaling relatively hands-off. It's going to happen automatically for you. This is an automated rule, but it's also only going to happen if you are getting good results, which is what most Google advertisers want, right? We want to spend more money if we're getting great results. So let's start by giving this a name. So I'm going to call this budget increase 3%. And then we come down here and we get into this section here. So the action, like what action do we want to happen? So what do we want it to apply to first? Do we want it to apply to all the campaigns within this ad account or select certain campaigns? I'm going to go ahead and click on selected campaigns and just go ahead and select this campaign here and click done. Next, we've got conditions. Okay, so basically we want this rule to apply to these campaigns. What conditions need to be met for this to apply? Now, there are lots of different metrics and data points that you could use here. What I would recommend is you go with something conversion based. So either something based on your return on ad spend. Let's say you're like an e-commerce business and you're able to track that accurately and in real time. Then go with something based on return on ad spend. Scale my budget as long as my return on ad spend is above X. Or if you're generating leads, for example, you could go with cost per conversion and say scale my budget as long as my cost per lead is below X. Okay. So I'm just going to go into conversions and go ahead and select cost per conversion. Obviously that can apply to lots of different conversions. Okay. So cost per conversion is the condition. And that's a greater than sign. We want to change that to a less than in this scenario. Let's say we run the numbers for our business and we know that if our cost per lead is less than, say, £30, then that's a great result for our business and we're happy to scale. We've run the numbers and we work out that once we factor in our conversion rate from lead to client and we factor in what the clients are worth to us, $30 cost per lead is pretty good. Okay. So then we go ahead and click apply. So it's this campaign. As long as the cost per conversion is lower than $30 or £30 in this case, what do we want to happen? So we've got action, choose what happens. Okay, so we can enable campaigns, pause campaigns, etc. In this case, we want to change budgets. So what we want to do under action is increase budget in this scenario, and then we can increase it by either a percentage or a fixed amount. Now, I'd recommend going with a percentage because that means it'll update dynamically. If you set a fixed amount of, let's say in this case, we'll increase the budget by £2 or £3 a day. Well, if our campaign's performing really well and we're scaling over time, and we've got a budget of £500 a day eventually, and it's still only going up by like £1 or £2 a day, it's just too small an amount. Whereas a percentage, obviously, as the budget scales, the increment in sort of dollar or pound amounts is going to go up by a larger amount because it's a fixed percentage. So that's what I recommend you do. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use 3%. Now, 3% is on the fairly conservative side. It's not a very aggressive scaling strategy. You can use more aggressive scaling strategies for Google Ad campaigns. And there are times where more aggressive strategies are called for. Let's say you've got a promotion that's working really well right now. You want to take advantage of maybe like a Black Friday sale, or you've got something seasonal, something with a time component. And you're like, oh, if we only scale, in 3% increments, it's going to take ages before we're actually spending much more money than we are now. We might miss out on peak season, we might miss out on this special sale that's crushing it for us right now. In which case you can absolutely scale more aggressively. But sort of as a default, assuming your business is not in that scenario, you're running lead campaigns, you're running sales campaigns, and you basically want to spend more as long as they're performing well, something like 3% I think is quite appropriate. Then it's not required, but often you can often I'd recommend you setting up a budget limit. Just in case you do sort of somewhat set this and forget this, you're like, oh, my scaling is being taken care of. You focus on other areas of your business. You don't want to be a scenario where you come back, in a few months' time. And I've seen this happen and people are like, oh, okay, I'm spending a lot more than I'm actually comfortable with. I'm not sure we've got the cash flow for that, etc., etc. So you could set an upper spending limit, daily budget limit, just put in whatever is appropriate for business. I can just pop in £500, for example. Okay, then we get down into the frequency section. So how often do we want this rule to run? Daily is the default. I think that's absolutely fine. So provided we meet the criteria, the condition, so in this case, our cost per conversion is less than £30, I am happy for this rule to be run today, and then again tomorrow, and then again afterwards. And you can see even with a 3% increment, if you do that, you pop in like 3% compounding, but daily, you'll see that pretty quickly you can get significantly larger budget levels. Pick a time of the day. Often we say we might run the rule at midnight. Between midnight and 1 a.m. seems to help with Google's delivery systems, and I'm not sure it makes much difference, to be perfectly honest, but pick a time of day when you want that rule to be run. And then this part is really, really important. Like, what data set do you want to use? Now, the default is all time, and it's very important you change that, okay? So I would have a default for me, like what I'd typically recommend would be about 7 days, something like that. Now, that needs to be adjusted depending on conversion volume, but let me sort of explain how this works and why this is important. So the data set that Google is going to look at to determine whether or not your condition has been met is what this is talking about. So when Google's going, is your cost per conversion less than £30? What time period do they look at to make that assessment? Do they look at, as I've set it up here, in the last 7 days? Or do they look at all time or whatever? Now, the reason why I don't like going with all time is you can have a scenario, and I've seen this happen many times, where your cost per lead was well below, your cost per conversion was well below what you needed it to be. So let's say our upper limit is £30 and your cost per conversion has been £15 for the first couple of months of running a campaign. And then recently, maybe there's been changing market conditions, maybe it's seasonal, maybe there's fatigue, depending on what part of Google you're running ads on. So your cost per conversion is going up, 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 and up. And it could have been an average of £40 for the last, say, 5 days, 7 days, and that's no longer profitable for your business. You don't want to keep scaling. But if it's been an average of £40 for the last 7 days, but an average of £15 for the last 2 months, you're going to keep scaling. Even though your results right now aren't great, you're going to keep spending more and more and more if you have that all-time time frame. So using a time period of something like 7 days is a lot more appropriate, because that's going to adjust your budget. It's only going to scale your budget according to the most recent performance, what's actually happening right now. And that's just more useful. The reason why I said 7 days needs to be adjusted according to conversion volume is because you can shorten that time frame if you generate lots and lots of conversions, because you get more data quicker. If you're looking at the last 2 days of data, that might be really representative and accurate of how things are performing if you're generating 100 conversions a day. But if you're only generating 1 conversion a day, looking at the last 2 days of data, it's kind of meaningless, right? It's like, did you get a conversion? Did you not? You haven't got enough data for that to be statistically significant. So the less conversions you get, the longer the time frame wants to be. The more you get, the shorter that time frame can be, with 7 being like a good standard, okay? And then you get emailed the results. You can see it says only if there are changes or errors. You probably don't want to change that to be emailed every time the rule runs, because that can be quite annoying. Great, then we can go ahead and click Save Rule. Now, in a second, I'm going to show you the other component to this scaling strategy that's really, really important. Before I do that, I just want to let you know about our done-for-you Google Ad services. So my company can create, manage, and optimize your Google Ad campaigns for you. We can take all that workload off your hands and almost certainly get you better results than if you manage it yourself, because we do this all the time. We spent tens of millions on the platform. And if that sounds interesting, you can go ahead and book a free call with one of my team members. There is a link in the video description below. Come through to a page, book in a free call, no obligation, of course, to find out how we might be able to help, how we might be able to implement stuff like this for you so that you don't have to do it, and help you get the best results possible. So if that sounds interesting, go ahead and do that, and hopefully we get a chance to work together. Okay, so we've now set up the scaling rule. So our budget is going to be increased dynamically according to performance in 3% increments, as many times potentially as once per day. But of course, if the condition's not met, then the budget won't increase. And that's a great way to scale for all the reasons I've described, right? It's hands off, it's going to happen according to performance, all the stuff that a lot of Google advertisers want. To make this even better though, what you can do is create a rule that operates in reverse. So if your results aren't as good as you want them to be, you can have your budget dynamically be decreased, which is often something I'd recommend. It ensures that you're spending more money when the results are really good and less money when the results aren't so good. And most businesses are going to have fluctuations, whether that's seasonal or whether that's according to, ad fatigue issues, again, depending on where on Google you're advertising, or it's dependent on stuff your competitors are doing, all sorts of things. So having that dynamic increase or decrease according to performance can be really, really valuable and increase your overall return on ad spend significantly. So how would you go about doing that? So I'm back in the example ad account, the campaign section. I'm going to go ahead and click on more, create an automated rule. I'm going to call this budget decrease 3%. Okay. And then the action, I'm going to do selected campaigns and select the same campaign. Click done. The conditions this time are going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to go with the same metric. I'd recommend you go with the same metric. In this case, instead of it being less than £30, I'm going to say if our cost per conversion is more than £40, then I want this to apply. You don't normally want to have it be the same amount. I mean, you could have, if it's lower than £30, increase the budget. If it's higher than £30, decrease the budget. I'd normally put in some sort of buffer where you're quite happy for the budget just to stay where it is. And that's going to vary, depending on business, of course. But I might say, look, if it's over £40, that just really doesn't work for us. If it's between 30 and 40, that's okay. Below 30 is great. Businesses typically have those sorts of range, and you can apply that to your business. So I'm going to say if the cost per conversion is above £40, what action do we want to happen? We want to change budget again. And this time we want to decrease budget. We're going to go by percentage again. I'm going to do 3% in the other way. And then you can set a lower budget limit to say, I never want my campaigns to get below, whatever that happens to be for your business. I never want to be spending less than £100 a day, $100 a day, $1,000 a day, $10 a day, whatever is appropriate for you and your budgets, because I know I need these conversions coming in to make the rest of my business function. Frequency, we're going to set daily. I'm going to get this to run at the same time frame, so roughly midnight. And then again, using data from, very important that we match that up and don't go with all time. I'm going to go with the last 7 days in this instance. And then I've got email results, again, only if there are changes or errors. And then I can go ahead and click Save Rule. And now we've got those two rules in place. So we've got that sort of middle ground. If our cost per conversion is between £30 and £40, nothing happens to the budget. If it's below £30, we can go ahead and scale. If it's above £40, then the budget will get brought back down. And like I said, a lot of benefits associated with having things set up that way. You don't have to use cost per conversion, like I mentioned. You could use return on ad spend instead. A lot of e-commerce businesses will do that. You're like, okay, we need to hit a 4x return on ad spend or better, in which case we'll scale. Anything below a 3x return on ad spend is just not good for us. We want to decrease the budget. In that middle range, we can just sort of leave the budget as it is. And like I said, if you do need to be more aggressive with your scaling, you could increase that percentage increment from 3% to something larger, particularly if you're trying to take advantage of something seasonal or a particular sale or something that you want to have a big impact. You're like, this is really working, let's spend more now and take advantage of it. And just because you've got these automated rules in place doesn't mean you always just have to abide by these. You could go in and make manual adjustments to budgets as well. You could turn off the rules. There's a lot of flexibility there, particularly for those times like taking advantage of a sale or there's been a massive news event. No one cares about our ads whatsoever. They're all focusing on that big news event. Right, let's go in and manually decrease our budget to make sure we're not spending whilst people aren't in the frame of mind to be buying or becoming a lead for our thing. And before you go ahead and implement this scaling strategy, I'd strongly recommend you check out this video. In that video, I show you how we made one change to our clients' Google Ad campaigns that tripled their results. It's a change that's quick and easy to implement, so if you haven't already, go ahead and check this out.